kind of come in as it goes. Okay. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. I guess we're right there on the cusp. My name is Ching. I'm an instructor with the Language Arts Department. I teach English 100, English 200, and then a kind of a variety of creative writing courses. What we're going to be talking about today is that thing that oftentimes causes us a lot of stress and anxiety, which is kind of the research process and where to find sources. I've done this particular SE workshop a number of times. I do encourage you to make it yours. So that means if you have questions, if there's things that you're not sure about, if you've been struggling with something in your class when you've been doing research, feel free to ask it as I'm going through these things, just so that we can kind of make the most of it. We'll talk a little bit about the research process in the beginning. We'll talk about the CRAP test and sort of evaluating sources, and then we'll kind of get into where you can find sources. And that should take us to right around, I think, around 12:50, 12:45, maybe a little bit later than that, depending. But we'll also have time for questions and things like that, so you can always ask me as well. Okay. And you can throw, if you want to as well, you can throw questions already if you have them in the chat, and I may not answer them immediately, but in the the corresponding or the relevant section, I can discuss them too. Okay. Let me know if you need me to slow down as well too. Captions should be enabled as well if you need. Okay, so when we talk about the research process, when you're in your class or you're working out there as a professional, and you're thinking about, all right, I've got to work on this research paper, or I've got to write a proposal for my job, or whatever it might be. We oftentimes think of the research process is just sort of sitting at our computer. Let's kind of just plug in some keywords, take us about an hour, and we'll have kind of what we need to get our paper written, or our proposal written, or whatever we're working on written. But it's really important, and that's why I kind of start with it, to establish what the research process is and kind of what it entails. And to me, this always makes me feel a little bit better, because sometimes when I'm having a challenge, I remind myself, oh yeah, I'm in the initial research stage right now, so I'm not supposed to have all the answers yet. So there are 3 stages. The first is the initial research stage. So this is when you've got a possible topic, and now you're just kind of, getting your feet wet, trying to explore it and see what's out there about it. Maybe you've got some initial questions that you're starting with, and you're trying to find those answers to that question. Just again, trying to get familiar with whatever it is that we're writing. And the goal of this stage of the research process is really to narrow the scope of our project. So maybe if we've got a topic like sea level rise, that's a pretty large topic. So as if we can narrow that down, if we can get it to be a little bit more workable, the better off we'll be. So you might find that as we're in this initial research stage and looking into the topic, that we find a lot of our research is focused on Hawaii, and that's where our interest is, been looking at things. So that's one way we can focus it, right, through location. But we might also find, when we're looking at sources and we're looking into that particular problem, that there's one cause that seems to be, brought up again and again and again. And so that's another way that you can kind of focus your research. Instead of focusing on sea level rise, you start to look specifically at one cause of it, right? So that's kind of the point of the first initial research stage. Then you have what we call the deeper research stage. This is after you've got a pretty solid topic, you have a sense of where you're going, and now you're trying to really develop your argument, develop your purpose.
Your plug.
Thank you. Trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to do with this paper? What am I going to do with this proposal? And then after you figure that out, gathering more material to help to support it and develop it and get where you want to be with it. And then we have the last stage, which is what we call the further research stage. So this is where probably you've already drafted your paper, you've drafted whatever it is that you're writing or working on. You've gotten some feedback and you realize, what, there's some gaps in my knowledge here, or there's some areas that need to be filled in. And that's when you go back and you're trying to gather more research as you go. So I'm sure as you can kind of get, that sounds like a lot, and it is, right? Which is why, when you are, before you start your research, you're in your class or whatever it may be, that for the next 4 weeks, you're going to be working on this paper. It's really important. One, you kind of choose something that you're interested in, and that it's focused enough, and that's something you probably want to run by your professor. But more than that you make time to complete your research. Research does take time to go through, to find one good quality source. It'll probably take you half an hour to an hour, because it's a lot of sifting. It's a lot of looking. It's a lot of reading. And so you want to also make time. Some other things that you can do, list some questions that you have when you first start the research process. You know, think of what are some who, what, where, when, why, how questions that you have about your topic, because you're trying to access that beginner's mind and trying to get a sense of where you're at right now. Listing those questions out, like, what's the problem, what are the causes, what are some of the effects, why is it so serious, who are the major players or the key individuals involved. Doing that at the beginning, right, as you're going through the initial research stage, you can gather the answers, and then of course more questions, more answers lead to deeper questions and answers as you go. Keep in mind, you have an open mind as you move through the research process. You might already have an idea of what you want to say at the beginning, but that might change as you learn more about the topic. And of course, you want to keep a research log, and that can be anything that is essentially where you house all of your notes and your research and things like that. And I'll kind of talk about what you might include in that research log in the next set of slides. Let me know if you need me to slow down or repeat myself. Okay, so one thing that you're going to want to be aware of as you're starting the research process and kind of adding to your research log is the kinds of sources that you'll need. So when you are working on a research project, we typically have 4 kinds of sources. Easy way to remember this is the acronym BEAM. So you'll have background sources. So these are sources that are like facts, historical information, definitions, stuff that really just provides background and context for whatever it is that you're writing about. Then you'll have exhibits or evidence. These are like case studies, statistics, different kinds of research articles, perhaps, things that you're going to use to possibly support your purpose and support what it is that you're going to put forward when you eventually write this paper. You'll also have what we call argumented sources. So I usually typically call like expert opinions and expert testimony argument sources. These are things that really speak directly to your argument, but aren't necessarily stats or data or studies. They're more so opinions, that kind of thing. And then we have method or theory sources. So this is like perhaps you're writing like a critical, a critical analysis paper, and you need to ground your critical analysis in a critical theory. Or maybe you're writing a science paper and you need to ground that science paper in your particular methodology. So this is what you might provide, some background information on how you went about doing your study or how you went about your analysis. In most classes, you're really going to rely perhaps on background and exhibits or evidence. But of course, again, your science classes, some of your English classes, things like that, you're going to have your method theory sources as well. So what kinds of things can we do when we talk about a research log and keeping track of our research? Well, one, you want to make sure you're doing something. It could be a Google Doc, it could be, a notebook. I prefer to write down my notes in an actual spiral bound notebook. That's because for me, it makes the process a little bit more physical. But I do understand it's nice to have that Google Doc or that Word document open and just be able to add to it. But whatever you do, whenever you're going to start the research process out, do something to keep track of that. Some place where you can keep track of everything you're gathering, from the quotes and statistics and data to the expert testimonies, as well as your own thoughts, opinions, and ideas. It's really important. You can always add to the log. So whenever you're doing your research, you never really want to delete anything because you never know if you might need it, right? In that initial research stage, you're gathering all of this information just to learn as much as you can about it. And deeper research stage, you might think, okay, well, maybe I need this source and this source and this source, but I don't need a couple of these other sources that I found. Don't delete them, because when you're in that third research stage, you might realize, oh, you know what? I really needed that definition, right? And then all of a sudden you're spending half an hour trying to go and find it because you had deleted it or removed it. So with your research log, when you are keeping track of your sources, never delete anything, never throw anything away. Just, always be adding to it. Good thing is, one, it helps you to remember the details a lot more, also helps you to avoid plagiarism. When you are adding an entry into your research log, first thing you want to do is you want to skim and evaluate the source to make sure that the source is of good quality. We're going to talk about this CRAP test in a little bit, so kind of have that in your mind. You also want to make sure, first thing that you do when you are noting the information about the source, put down the bibliographic information. If you're working in APA or MLA format, or maybe Chicago, write that down first. That's oftentimes, and I'm going to show you a hack to easily be able to generate the works cited or the reference for a particular source that you're looking at. But put that down first so you don't have to worry about it later. But also, once you're done with that, go ahead and read and annotate it once, putting down your initial thoughts and ideas and opinions, and then go through, read it again. And that's when you're going to, summarize details, paraphrase details, write down any quotes or other kinds of information that you might want to use later. Might want to label these sections, maybe initial thoughts, afterthoughts, and then try to draw out connections between the two. And then you can move to the next source. Usually when I talk to my students about this particular topic, they bring up what they call Cornell notes. I didn't have Cornell notes in school. What I had was what's called a double entry journal. And you're seeing my version of a double. This is actually my photo of a notebook that I wrote on. You can kind of see almost the indents of my own notes in my journal. But a double entry journal is really exactly what it looks like. It can be a Google Doc if you want to, or it can be a notebook like this here. What you do is if you're going to do a Google Doc, I would suggest, you create a table with 2 columns. On the left side, you label that column from the text. And in that column, you're going to put things that are directly from the text. So this is not your words. These are not your opinions. These are not your ideas. This is stuff that's taken directly from whatever that it is that you're reading and looking at. This is important because the good thing about keeping a double entry journal is it helps to get a sense of, okay, the source's ideas and your ideas, so that when you're starting to actually write whatever it is that you're going to be writing or working on, you don't get confused. Because sometimes folks just kind of throw everything onto the page without really keeping track of it or labeling it. And then all of a sudden they're writing their paper and they're like, oh, wait, was this what the source says or this what I said, right? And that's going to create some problems in terms of plagiarism and properly representing sources. So on the left-hand side, you put some of the text. And then the right-hand side, you put, from your mind, from your thoughts, opinions, and ideas. Good thing about this is you can interact with the text. So say on the left-hand side, I added a really long quote. On the right-hand side, I could put that quote into my own words. I could paraphrase it. That way, instead of having that really long quote, I can show my reader that I'm credible and I know what I'm talking about. I've got my paraphrase already ready to go. If there's an important passage or an important idea that I don't understand, I can write that on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, I can write my questions or my thoughts or what I'm confused about. If there's some key details from a source, I can write that on the left-hand side, and on the right, I can put maybe some connections that I'm seeing between that source or that idea and the other source. But again, however you decide to do it, do something, familiar like this. So that way, when you actually are reading it, it's keeping track of those kinds of things, it'll be easier later on, as it kind of says on the right. It also helps you to inventory things that you're looking at. Again, make the process physical, which helps you to remember, helps you digest, and all those wonderful things. Oh, and usually what I tell folks to do is, in addition to creating the 2 columns, where it says double entry journal up here, for each source, I usually tell folks, throw the bibliographic information in there. So you'd have the bibliographic information up at the top, and then you'd have everything on the left coming from the source, everything on the right coming from your mind. A new page for every single source that you look at. And then you're going to start writing your paper. All you got to do is open up that research log and you've got everything ready to go. You need that quote, you need that paraphrase, you need that idea, you need that question. It's all there for you. So you don't have to worry about that later on. Makes it a little bit less stressful when you actually start writing the paper. So what are some things that we consider credible and not credible? What are some things that you're often told are not credible? Usually professors say there's one thing in particular that starts with a W. Yeah. Oh, social media. That's very good. Yes. Social media is certainly not credible. Yeah. Yes. I think was that Betty. Wikipedia. Yeah. Good. Oh, ChatGPT. We'll definitely talk about ChatGPT toward the end, but yes, absolutely. So social media, Wikipedia, social media, you're seeing links and you're seeing things being said on social media. Maybe a link to an article perhaps might be reliable, but you're really going to want to make sure that you're checking it and you're vetting it before you believe it or before you click on share, because a lot of misinformation gets shared on social media. Wikipedia, when Wikipedia came out many, many years ago, it sort of used to be a little bit less credible than it is now. I would say it's a little bit better, but in academic institutions, when you're working in the professional world, generally Wikipedia is not considered credible. We're all human, though. I know that sometimes we want to look something up, we plug it into Google, and the first thing we see is that Wikipedia source, and we click on it. I usually tell folks, if you're going to look at that, you're not going to cite it, you're not going to use it in your paper, but it might help to give you some ideas, right? But that's not something you're actually going to use. And I'm actually going to show you, when we start looking at sources in the Leeward CC library, a better place to go than Wikipedia to kind of get the same information that you typically would. ChatGPT, absolutely. So the problem with ChatGPT, well, there's a number of problems with ChatGPT. I love technology. Technology is a really great thing, but there's two problems with ChatGPT that, and why I don't necessarily allow it in my class. One is that ChatGPT, that's not creating information, that's taking information from other places and putting it together. So that creates copyright issues and that infringes on the rights of other people. And for me, as a writer and as a scholar, that's bothersome because that's essentially stealing ideas of others without proper representation. And the other problem that it poses is that the information might not always be reliable. And so, to me, it creates more of a problem because, your assignment, your everything, your authority, you're basing it on something that you actually can't properly vet. And for me, that makes me anxious. I would never submit something like that because I want to know where it comes from. And when you're on ChatGPT, you never know necessarily where it's coming from. Okay. Some other things that can be a problem. One, personal interviews. Now, personal interviews, it depends on the assignment. I mean, you might have in your geology course or, you might be doing an ethnography. And then, of course, personal interviews would be allowed. So I usually tell folks with personal interviews, make sure that the professor is allowing them because it is relevant in some cases. But, probably your professor is going to have some processes and procedures to make sure that they can verify the interview itself and the content of the interview. So personal interviews, it's more of an asterisk there. It might possibly be able to be used. But I usually say when, folks tell me like, oh, my friend's mom is an expert working for the Department of Defense. Can I do a personal interview with them? Yeah, I mean, that might work. But you might also ask them, is there a place where you can find the information that they're going to tell you about? And that might then allow you to sort of get away from some of the things that are going on. Yeah, exactly, Betty. It can definitely help to generate ideas as long as the sources are listed. You can click on those sources, and it might take you to places that are more credible than necessarily Wikipedia. So that's why when it comes to that Wikipedia rule, I don't necessarily think it's always the case. But I'm going to again show you some places that are better than Wikipedia. You also want to make sure your article should always have citations or references, just like was just said there. If you're reading an article and they're making claims, they're giving you statistics, and they're talking about various things, if they're not providing where that information came from, that's a problem because they're essentially assuming that you're going to believe whatever they're saying and that you're not going to go and cross-reference it. So you always want to make sure that there's citations or references, some way for you to verify the information, links perhaps, and that the links work. You also want to avoid personal blogs and self-published material generally. Things that are credible, what we call peer-reviewed sources, and I'm going to show you an easy way to find those. But you can check if a source is peer-reviewed by doing just a little bit of quick Google search of that source, or going to the About Me or the About Us section of the website. You should be able, they'll usually tell you, this is a peer-reviewed website. You can also go to credible institutions, Mayo Clinic, Department of Justice, state and city websites, EDUs, universities, generally reliable, articles and references from credible institutions like those, and books and magazines from reputable sources. And of course, well, what makes a source reputable, which is all we're going to kind of get to. And a good way to figure this out is to use what we call the CRAP test. How many of you have heard of the CRAP test? Great. Yeah. And the CRAP test has been around for a while. I'm usually surprised, though, how many people aren't aware of it. But at the same time, right, there's some things that are important to cover, especially in sort of our current technological age. So hopefully, this will be a little bit of a refresher, but also have some new information here. And then after we're done with the CRAP test, we'll start actually showing you where you can find sources and kind of applying what we're talking about. So CRAP test is made of 5 things: currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, and purpose. And so the purpose of the CRAP test is to take this in, take the criteria and apply it so that when you're looking at a source, you can think, okay, is this source reliable? Well, let me see, is it current? Is it relevant? Does it have the authority? Is it accurate? Is there, is the purpose in line with what I'm trying to do? And is it, credible in that particular respect? It's important to note as we talk about each criterion that just because it's not as current as perhaps another source, it doesn't necessarily mean that it disqualifies the source. It's a holistic test. So, you have to consider all of the parts together. It might lack a little bit of relevance, but it might be more current, have a lot of authority, and that can make it still a good quality source. So you kind of have to think of all of these things together. All right, so currency has to do with timeliness. And so some questions we can ask to determine whether or not a source is current enough and thus, credible. We can ask questions like, well, when was the source published or posted? Do the links on the website work? This is a big problem. If you go to a website and they're giving you all this data and this information, they're hyperlinking all of the sources that they're getting this info from, and you click on that, and those links are broken, or they take you to something that you know is not what they said it was going to be. That's a problem, right? That's a currency issue. It means that perhaps this source is not being edited as frequently as it should. Same thing too, if you're looking at books or even if you're looking at the website, look at the date of publication, but also look at the date it was last edited or updated, because it could be a little bit of an older source, but if it was updated, in the last couple of years, that still might make it current. Um, how old is too old when it comes to sources? When does a source no longer become reliable or relevant or current, rather? When do you stop trusting a piece of information in terms of currency? And of course, the question might be, well, what am I writing? Um, I've got a decade in there, 10 years. I mean, maybe it depends, right? If I were writing a critical analysis of a music video that came out in the 2000s, something that was 10 years old, maybe that would probably be okay. But, you know, for something like a paper on sea level rise and how to address sea level rise, well, that's an ongoing problem, right? New stuff comes out all the time. So yeah, it definitely depends. I would probably say, for most topics, about 5 years is probably maybe a little bit too old. But if you're working in like the sciences, even then, like, trying to get the most up to date information is important. But I would probably say, five years is probably a good, you know, cutoff point when it comes to currency. And again, this is only one factor, but at that point, then you start to wonder, okay, is this information up to date? Things have changed, understandings have changed, definitions have changed, all those kinds of things, right? Okay, so that's currency. Then we have relevance. So this is thinking about how relevant a source is to your needs. When you're writing a academic paper for your English 200 course or for your History 355 course or, something like that, you've got to think, all right, you want to have the types of sources that, you would be typically reading in that course. You want to kind of avoid what we call, sources that are a little bit too shallow or aren't in depth enough. KITV news article, I've got nothing against KITV, but if you're writing a research paper that's tackling sea level rise in Hawaii in your English 200 course, that 3-paragraph KITV news report is probably not going to be the most relevant to your needs. It might provide some information about some recent events that have happened, but is there a better source in terms of relevance? Something that really examines the issue and the problem in more detail. Right? Again, I usually think of relevance as, would you be reading this in your college classroom? Would you be reading this in your professional life? If not, then probably it's not as relevant as you need it to be. Relevance also has to do with relevance to your actual topic. If you're pulling up that article and it's like maybe 10 pages, but only 2 paragraphs of that 10 pages is actually dedicated to the discussion of what you're looking at, that's probably not as relevant as you want it to be. And at that stage, you want to skim it, right? Get a sense of that relevance. I would probably say move on to the next source, right? Part of this is just kind of determining, is it credible? So you don't have to spend an hour taking notes on it. You can quickly skim it and go, okay, you know what? 2 paragraphs out of the 10 pages, probably not as relevant as I want it to be. Move on to the next source. Keeping in mind, there could be some things in those 2 paragraphs that are useful. But again, we want to make sure we're spending our time with good quality sources. So maybe in that case, wouldn't want to waste our time taking notes on it. But also thinking about, how does it rank in comparison to other sources that you're looking at? As you move through the research process from the first stage, the second stage, the third stage, you're going to start to become an expert on this topic. You're going to start to get, really good quality sources. And as you go from one source to the next, as you go from one stage to the next, your purposes change, right? You've gone from just learning about the topic, now you're really trying to articulate what you want to say. If you're running into this, you pull up a source and it's got the same information, maybe move on, right? If it doesn't offer anything new, updated, current, anything like that, move on. Because what you're really using in your essay is going to be the best or most convincing material that you want to provide, right? The most up to date, the most relevant, the most reliable. So as you're moving through the stages, you're easily going to be able to start excluding things based on relevance. Because if it's not as relevant to your topic, and if you've already got that information, well, why are you taking notes on it, right? Just to fulfill a source requirement? No. I mean, if you're in my class, you should tell folks that I do have a minimum source requirement, but it's about quality, not quantity. Some papers, they can get away with that minimum source, that 8 sources to complete that research paper. But most cases, you need, 10, 12 sources, because a lot of those other sources, just providing some background and things like that. All right. Then we have authority. So this is the source of the information. So you want to ask questions like, who's the author or publisher? Do they have the authority? Do they have the credentials to be talking about what they're talking about? If you're dealing with a science topic, hopefully the person that is writing it has some background in science, right? And has the credibility to discuss that topic. If they don't, sometimes you read an article, in a popular publication, and it's just by a news reporter, but maybe they've been covering science topics for the last 20 years. Or maybe they just started covering science topics, but their article is filled with a number of sources. So that's what you also want to look at. They might not have the credibility, but do they have a lot of references? Do they have a lot of sources? Because that can help to balance that out when it comes to authority. I'm also thinking about, is it peer reviewed, and is the contact information there? This is an important one about contact information, because if you're reading an article and there's no author listed, or there's no way to actually reach out to the publisher or the person who's producing that work, to me, that's a red flag. Because, if experts are reading this article and they see any problems or issues with the data, there has to be a way for them to reach out to those individuals to make sure those corrections get made. So if you're not seeing contact information, to me, that raises a red flag. What exactly is kind of being hidden here? So, but of course, not every article is the same. I always kind of give that caveat. But if you're not seeing that contact info, critical thinking hat on, maybe we need to dig a little bit deeper into the author or the publisher before we start using this source or taking notes on this source. You also want to look at the accuracy, which is the reliability of the information. So when you're choosing articles for your paper, you want to make sure that they're well-reasoned and the support is credible. So yes, you've got a credible individual writing this paper, but how credible, how current, how relevant is the material that they're using? This article could be published in 2023, but they're using sources from 20 years ago, right? That's kind of a problem. Is there links to the sources? Do they have a works cited page? A big one for me too is, can you access the original source? And usually when I talk about this, I give the example of, I had a student once, and a lot of my students, they write about kind of similar topics, kind of semester to semester, but also some new topics as well too. But so I'm kind of familiar with a lot of topics that my students choose. And so what ended up happening is my student chose a topic that has come up in my class before, and they were working on the topic, and they had this source that I had never seen before, which can happen, right? New sources come out all the time. So I was really interested in this source, and it was saying something completely different than I had seen in other sources that have been provided, including other sources that other students were using for their papers. So I was like, okay, well, this is interesting. So I looked at the information, I clicked on the source, I went to the works cited page, I looked up the source, and like, it seemed good, like, oh wow, this is really interesting. But it kept referencing this study that was conducted by a university. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. I went to the study that it had linked, but when I went there was a big banner on the front page that said that this study has been retracted due to inaccurate information, and the study being used inaccurately by a number of sources. So, the student had looked at this source initially appeared really great, but when you tried to access the actual material that was being discussed, the study and the statistics, not good, right? So you also want to make sure that too, right? Check your sources in some cases, because if you're seeing something that seems really good, right? If it's not the original material, then you're relying on that. You're putting your trust in that and your authority in that. So also check that you can actually access that original source material. I sometimes also give the example of, there was another student who was writing a paper, and the source had the article that they were using cited a study done in Germany. But when you clicked on the link, it took you to the site that was done in Germany, but it was all in German. And this was an American site. So you're really sort of relying on the American site to translate it and to do the interpretation of the data, and that information was inaccurate. So became a lot of issues there. But yeah, can you access the original source material? Because your credibility is the credibility of your sources, especially when you're writing your papers for your projects. But also when you go into the professional world, right? If you're going to put forward ideas, you're going to create your proposals and do those kinds of things, you really want to make sure you're double checking the information. Because if you're going to present that to your colleagues, You're going to present that to your boss. You're going to present that to your students. You want to make sure that you vetted that information and you know it well, right? So it's a professional thing as well. Does the information coincide with other sources? Now, again, of course, information can be new as it's more current, but if it differs a lot in terms of the basic facts of an issue or of a problem, that's probably a little bit of a red flag. Because, most sources, even if they differ or they're more up to date, will agree with the basic facts, I would say. If you're seeing spelling and grammar errors, probably a problem. Is there an academic tone, or do they rely on a lot of emotional manipulation? A lot of hyperbole, a lot of exaggeration, a lot of examples, and not so much sources. That could be a problem. And of course, purpose as well. So thinking about, what is this source attempting to do? Is it trying to persuade? Is it trying to explain? Is it trying to inform? If you're on the internet, you can pay attention to those the website endings, right? .coms, it's a commercial source, can still be okay, but generally there to get clicks, so it might not always be the most informational. .orgs, always be careful with .orgs. Not all organizations are created equal. So if you're on a .org, make sure you've gone through and you've looked at the About Us section. And usually what I tell my students to do is take that organization's name, throw it into Google, put controversial next to it, and see what pops up. Because usually if there's some kind of controversial quality with that particular organization, or that organization has been involved in some things that they shouldn't, it'll pop up. So also look into the organization on the .orgs. .edu is generally reliable. .gov is generally reliable. Also think about who created it again, contact information, is the intent clear? Are you seeing any biases? Is any information left out? This is another thing too, right? As you become an expert, as you move through the research stages, when things aren't being addressed, when things aren't being left out or aren't being discussed. And if they aren't, that's a logic issue, because it tells me that, they're not being complete with what they're saying. And if they're leaving something out, well, okay, what else are they leaving out is usually what I ask. Okay, so remember, as we're kind of transitioning from this discussion to where you can find your sources, save yourself time, keep track of your source material, your quotes, your paraphrases, use that double entry journal that we talk about. Try to follow the critical reading process. That's where when you find a source, first skim that source to determine if it's credible, then read it, getting just a sense of it, then going back to it and taking your notes right after that. And we do that to make sure you've got a good sense of the article before you take notes on it, so that you're not wasting your time, or you have a pretty good idea of it, so that you're getting more good quality in-depth note taking there. And then when evaluating source material, take into consideration all aspects of the CRAP test. Just because it's not as relevant, it might not exclude it. It might be something good in there. But of course, if you're finding sources that are better on all levels, then that's probably where you want to spend most of your time. Okay, so let's talk about where to find sources. Any questions? I'm gonna transition screens here. Sorry, that's a lot, yeah. If you want the PowerPoint, you can email me. I'll throw my email address at the end and we can talk about it. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about where to find sources. I always tell my students, first place you should start is the library. Leeward is great. They have a great library, especially their online resources are fantastic. A lot of their catalog is available online, so that you don't have to worry about going to campus to find that book that you need. A lot of times you'll be able to get it here at the library. Usually when folks visit the library, this is where they start, so we call primo. We're not going to start here. Instead, we're going to start here with the research databases, and I'll kind of talk you through why I always recommend starting here instead of there to my students. But we're going to go into these research databases. So these research databases, there's over 135, and you notice here under each, it provides a little bit of an explanation of them. So, we've got great things like you can see a lot of documentaries and other things that are available to you. They've even got like access to the Star Advertiser, full ebook databases, all kinds of great things here. So, your professor, your class may recommend certain sources. Usually what I tell folks, start here on the right with Academic Search Complete. I'm also going to talk about a couple of these others as well too, like Credo Reference, Issues and Controversies, and Opposing Viewpoints. But I like Academic Search Complete. Academic Search Complete, it provides a little bit of a more focused search than starting with Primo. When you get here, you've got these different search bars. The more keywords you add here, more focused your results will be. We don't want to type in full sentences, of course. Why don't we want to type, Why don't we want to type that into this? Why do we want to use keywords instead of full sentences? Because I know this is how we search on Google.
Keywords can give you like different articles that have that word in it or reference that. Well, more of the sentences, it may be talking about sea level rise, but if it doesn't have that specific sentence, it may not be able to come up.
Yeah, could be, right? Yeah, it's definitely going to give you more focused results. You will get more resources available with the keywords. But the other thing too is that if you put all of this in here, it's searching all of the articles with those particular keywords. So, if you pull a full sentence like this, it's going to pull up, articles with sea level rise, but it's also going to pull up articles that say, why is it important? So you're going to get a lot of sources that aren't necessarily relevant to your needs, right? And that means more time spent sifting through those sources. So keywords, much more beneficial. And I think that was Annabella. If you want to actually, you want exact phrasing when you're searching, you can use the quotation marks. And what this does is it tells the search engine that you want this exact phrase when you are looking up topics. That can be helpful if you're looking for a particular term or a particular set of terms. Should note though, academic search complete does not do well with diacriticals, which is why I haven't included them here. Okay, so you'll notice, right? I typed in sea level rise, I typed in Hawaii. I've got a manageable amount of sources, 92. This should be pretty easy to kind of work through. But maybe I'm not sure if I want to focus on Hawaii. So I kind of remove that keyword, see what I get. 13,000 sources. That's going to take a lot of time. So in addition to adding different keywords here to help focus your results, what you can do is you can use these wonderful things on the left-hand side, these limits. So one thing I said that you can really be helpful in terms of making sure your sources are credible is ensuring that your sources are peer reviewed. So easy way to save yourself time, click peer reviewed. And it already cuts out any sources that aren't peer reviewed. It already reduced it by 2,000 sources or around there. You also want to make sure full text is a great tool because that makes sure you can actually access the full text without having to go through a number of other links or having to deal with a number of other challenges. And you'll notice we went from around 11,000 or something like that down to 36. We can also click references available, see what we get there. Brings it down to 182. And of course, you can toggle these on and off as you go. Maybe you get too little results. So you remove one of the factors. You kind of still see, okay, well, it's not peer reviewed, but maybe it's got references available. So that can still be helpful, although the peer reviewed sources had references anyway. And then of course we have that wonderful little bar right here. And I think we said 5 years. Yeah. We'll say 2017 because 2023 is still going on. Okay, brought it down. So we have the most recent sources that were available here. If we're not able to find anything, again, we might be able to expand our search a little bit out. Maybe it won't be as current as some other sources, but we get a few more. Maybe want to open it up, see what else we get, play with it a little bit to see what's going on. You've also got this source type section. So say your professor says, okay, I want you to use 8 sources minimum, but I want to make sure that you've got 1 academic journal, 1 book, these kinds of things. If you go to source type, you can also limit it by the type of source it is. So maybe your professor requires a newspaper source in addition to an academic journal source. So you can click on newspapers and it just refines it down to the newspapers. Yeah, as you're seeing there. Okay. So I'm going to move that out. On the left-hand side as well, you've got this subject thesaurus. And so maybe you're really having trouble finding sources. And some of that might have to do with the keywords you're using. So what this can do is, what its actual function is that you can kind of click these things and it will only give you sources that have those keywords. But what I like to do is, I like to have a keyword bank on the right. So what I do is I go, oh, these are some related key terms that might be useful in my search. So I kind of write that down so that when I'm running into a roadblock with my search, I can say, well, okay, I've been typing in sea level rise over and over and over again. Maybe I'll try some other, keywords that are related that I've been trying to find, right? And that can help you gather more sources. All right, so that's one way you can limit it. So say, you're doing your search, trying to go through, trying to find your sources. The great thing about Academic Search Complete is once you find a source, or maybe you're interested in this source, it's got a full abstract that tells you what the source is about. So you can determine, okay, is this relevant to my needs without even having to do a full reading? You can kind of get a sense of that already. But the nice thing about it, in addition to the fact that when you click on this, there it is. Give it a second. Yep. There it is. You can read it. You can look at it when it pops up. On the right-hand side, you've got a lot of tools that you can use. So say you don't have a lot of time to get your research done. You've only got maybe an hour. You're not going to be able to do a lot of really good note-taking yet, but you want to make sure that when you get home from work or you get home from class, that you can get back to these sources that you were looking at. So you've got a couple of tools here. This section here saves it, this button here saves it to your Google Drive. So you maybe don't want to have to go all through the process of searching and finding the source again. So you can save it right to your Google Drive or to your cloud. You can print it if you want to print it, if you have a printer at home or you're at the library and you want to print it. You can email it to yourself. And then one of my favorite tools is this one right here. Because, if you're working with APA, well, there is the APA reference for you. You don't even have to worry about creating it yourself or using some citation generator that you might not be able to trust. It's already there for you. So you can take that information, you can throw it into your research log, and some of that stress, it's off your plate. You don't have to worry about it too much. Yeah. Okay. That's Academic Search Complete. Another good one is Credo Reference. So this is the one that I was saying that, Wikipedia, it's okay. You don't want to cite it, right? Credo Reference is just like Wikipedia, but it's much more reliable because what it's doing is it's providing database sources or it's providing reference sources, but it's pulling them straight from academic journals, straight from academic publications, right? So if I'm doing something like sea level rise, and maybe for my paper, I need a background source that defines what sea level rise is, I can go to these sources and get a clear sense of some of that information. I mean, all of them are a little bit different. Some in particular is talking about the economics of sea level rise, but you get the idea. Same thing has the abstract, and it provides you just kind of a breakdown of the particular issue. These are not argument sources. These are not exhibit or evidence sources. These are strictly background sources for the most part. So this is where you want to kind of learn about topics. This is where you would go. Just get that kind of background information. And just like with Academic Search Complete, we've got our citation generator here. We'll break it down by Chicago, Harvard, or MLA. If you don't want to read it, your eyes are just so tired and exhausted, you can click read aloud and it will read it to you. This doesn't always work, but you can also, I don't know, Spanish. Sometimes it'll work, sometimes it won't. Translate into Spanish. I saw one. Does this one have Hawaiian? No, it does. I don't know. Sometimes the Hawaiian works, sometimes it doesn't. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so it'll translate it for you too. If maybe that's helpful for you as well. And again, you can share it, you can save it, all of those wonderful things. Okay, so this is for background sources, really helpful resource for background sources. We've also got some others like Issues and Controversies, JSTOR, and Opposing Viewpoints. Issues and controversies, if you're dealing with problems or issues, this is where you want to go. If you're dealing with same thing, kind of issues and controversies as well, but I think Opposing Viewpoints is a little bit broader. I'm going to pull this one up because what I like about this database, maybe other than some of the others, is that when I'm dealing with an issue like mental health, sorry, not just mental health, let's do mental health in schools. What this does is it breaks down the sources by type. So again, I've got academic journals here. I've got my argument sources, my viewpoint sources if I want to use them. I've got images, although this image is not particularly relevant, but there is an image there. Got some different videos. It'll have audio, podcasts, and those kinds of things, radio programs, and it's got like news articles as well too. So this can be particularly helpful for that. And just like with your other resource databases that I've been talking about, you've got your citation, you can send it to yourself, you can download it, you can print it. Oh, in this case, you could actually also highlight it too, if you want to as well. Read it aloud, it will also translate. I think this is the one that's not as great with the translation, but that's there for you. Okay, so that's just a kind of a selection of the databases that are available. Again, there are a number here that you can kind of check out, but those are my favorites. Those are usually the ones that I recommend. And of course, you also have access to the Primo search bar right here. And so just like with the academic databases, we want to use keywords. So the thing with the Primo search bar is the Primo search bar is searching everything. So there's a little bit more to sift through there, but if you're really running into a lot of problems, finding research in some of the databases, going to Primo can be helpful. And just like with the databases on the left-hand side, you've got those limits, right? So we can do publication date here. Well, 1801, that's definitely possibly out of date. Unless you want to quote, I don't know what theorist was from that particular period. But right, we can use that. We can by subject, by material type. Is it an article? Is it a chapter from a book? Is it peer reviewed? We can do that as well, right? So that can be helpful too. But even still, right, we've got a lot of sources. So you really want to try to manage these filters if you're going to go here, and you really want to be careful with your keywords. You can also go here too, like you can check, like, do I want articles? Do I want just print books? Do I want stuff that my professor has talked about? Primo is right on the main library website. It's right here. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a feature that a lot of people don't necessarily know about. And, it's one of my favorite features, and I always bring it up because it's just fantastic. So, say you live, we're not finding too, well, we got one right there. Okay. Say you live out in YNI, right? Which you might. And this book in particular is only available at LCC's library at the Pualoa campus. So, it's a little bit of a drive, yeah, hour maybe, depending on traffic to get there. And you really want this book. Even more of a challenge. Your professor said you've got to have at least one book source when you're writing this paper. So a really easy way to kind of make that maybe a little bit less stressful is click on that source that you want. Sorry, hold on a second. It's taking a moment. Why is it taking a moment? I don't know. Oh, there we go. Okay. And once you sign in, I thought I was already signed in, but give it a second. Once you sign in, you can click this little button here that says request specific copy. And what you can do is you can select the institution you want to pick it up. So LCC, yes, but we have Waianae Moku. So say I want that book at Leeward CC, but I really don't want to catch the bus. I don't want to drive. I don't want to catch the rail down to LCC to get it. I click this wonderful button. I hit send request. And in about 3 to 5 days, the wonderful librarians at the LCC library will mail this to Waianae Moku. And I'll get an email saying, bring in your student ID and you can pick up that book. Right. So all you got to do is go Waianae Moku. There's the book waiting for you. 5 minutes, pick it up, take it to work, do what you need to get done. Yeah. As it goes. And you also notice this thing's been popping up quite a bit. And normally what I do is I actually click on this. What I like this too is that if you need help with your research, this actually connects you with a reference librarian who can help you with your research. Okay. At the library, but gotta be during library hours. Yeah, gotta be during library hours. Okay. Questions on the library or any of the sources we kind of talked about? And the last thing I want to talk about, and you can throw them in the chat if you do, is just something that kind of came up when we were talking about ChatGPT. So usually folks want me to cover this in this section, but I'm going to do this real quick so we at least have a few minutes. And I think Tasha, you threw the link to the evaluation, yeah, inside the. So if you want to evaluate, but you thought this was particularly helpful, useful, you can go ahead and click the evaluation form. But a lot of folks wonder kind of what plagiarism is and what needs to be cited. So when it comes to plagiarism is anything here on the right. But of course, we've talked a little bit about AI and how some professors do allow it, some professors don't. So I always tell folks, make sure check with your professor. I don't allow it in my class. So, and that's established in my syllabus, but you might have a professor for some reason that does allow it. So you really want to make sure that you've checked with that, because some will consider it plagiarism and there are serious consequences for that. So other things that are considered plagiarism, copying source material without identifying it, right? So not saying where you got the source from, not including it on your works cited page, not including a citation in the text, including paraphrasing. paraphrasing is when you take a larger chunk of source material and you put it into your own words. Yes, you've put it into your own words, but you've got those ideas from someone else. So it needs to be acknowledged with a citation, both in the text as well as on the works cited or on the reference page. And you got to make sure you need that works cited or reference page. Just because you cite it in the text doesn't mean you can exclude it from the page or not include a page at all. Also considered plagiarism is submitting the same material to different courses. So say you wrote a paper in my English 100 course, you can't go to another professor's course and submit that same material. You're plagiarizing yourself. And usually professors will have that statement in there about everything you submit for the class has to be created in the class. So you can't be just submitting the same course materials either. And of course, dry linking. That's when you're making up data or you're borrowing or taking data from other people and saying it's your own. Or what sometimes comes up in coding classes, taking someone else's code and using it as your own code. That is also considered plagiarism as well. Okay. And of course, if you've done everything, we talked about, you've kept track of your sources, kept track of your research, you shouldn't have to worry about any of these wonderful things. And so, of course, usually with plagiarism, it's typically a time management issue. We're rushing at the end to kind of put everything together. And so we kind of forget those citations. We forget that works cited entry. We forget whatever it might be. If you're keeping track of it early on, when you start writing it, not going to have to worry about that too much. But of course, trying to put that paper together an hour before it's due, it's probably going to be a problem. Okay, that's it. Whew, covered a lot, didn't we? Any questions? Or things you're worried about or something that are coming up in your classes? Maybe.
Yeah. Hi, Donald. Thank you so much. I wish more of my students were here because this is precisely what a couple of my classes need, is evaluating resources. And so I'm really happy that you're having it here. So one question, is this recording available to the rest of the students who didn't make it? And I also have another point to make. Sometimes that auto citation doesn't really come up as MLA. And I have to warn my students, that, for example, John Osorio writes an article, but it's in an edited book with Craig Howes as the first name. And so students constantly are getting that auto citation for that book with Howes' name first. And they go ahead and, that's what they use, even though they're citing John Osorio. So just a word of caution on that. But okay, those were it.
Thank you, Betty. And yeah, absolutely. I mean, with that citation generator, I usually recommend it only because some students will use something, I think like Citation Monster or something, and that's usually where I see a lot of the issues. The ones on the Leeward site tend to be more reliable, but absolutely, exactly what Betty's saying. Anything you put in your paper, you're saying your grade, your authority, your credibility is reliant on what you put on that page. So if double check your sources, double check your citations, because if you're putting it there, that's you now. That's your credibility, your authority, your grade is on the line. So double check. Absolutely. And I think the recording will be up, but let me know, Betty. I can also I have a recording I use for my online classes. I can also just give you that. And it's on YouTube. My private YouTube.
That's awesome. Iakua, he's recording today's workshop. And I've placed the link for the recording from last semester. In the meantime, we'll get this recording up and posted on our YouTube channel by the end of this week. So students can use this link to go to our Writing Center YouTube channel. If they want it right away and they just want to look at last semester's, they can go ahead and see that there. But if they have a little time and they want to wait until at least Friday, we'll be able to get today's recording added. And Betty, we're so happy to see you and some of your students today. Yes, if any of you have any suggestions or feedback, please share that in our feedback form. Or we love questions. If you want to ask anything, feel free to let us know now.
And I would say the newer one, the one we just did, there's a discussion of AI in there. So the other one doesn't have that discussion, if that matters.
Yes, I've placed a link to our YouTube channel in the chat, so feel free to follow the link. And it's our Writing Center YouTube channel.
All right. Well, thank you so much. If you didn't get a chance to evaluate the course, not the course, if you didn't get a chance to evaluate the session, please go ahead and click that link and yeah, let me know. Hope it was helpful. And of course, if you have any questions or, I will of course reach out to your professor, but if you need any materials, or you can also always email me.
Yes, it does feel like a fun course, Professor. So
Well, I don't know if it's fun, but it's certainly useful. useful.
So join us for our next SC workshop on reading strategies. And we have included system colleges across UH. And so you'll find that even today's participants are from all around the UH system. And our next presenter will be Morgan Andaluz, and she's from Maui College. And she's going to talk about reading strategies. So if you're available on Friday between 12 and 1, come on and join us online and hear some reading strategies. If you're unable to attend, you can also follow this link for our YouTube channel and you can get the recording. We're usually able to update it with the recording within 3 to 4 days. There's also a playlist for our previous SC workshops. So if you're unable to attend, we also have a recording from last semester's reading strategy workshop. So we have a lot of goodies on our YouTube channel, so feel free to check it out.
Have a good day, everyone. Take care.